Both hands, blood and dust. Those were the only two things that registered clearly through the scope. Blood soaking through the left shoulder of a woman who weighed 118 pounds. Dust rising off the valley floor in pale curtains, stirred by boots that were moving fast and not going to stop. 20 fighters, moving in coordinated teams across the North Ridge, moving with the kind of purpose that told you they had done this before and expected to do it again. 90 seconds. That was the window. After that, every man in that valley was going to die. Her breathing slowed. 4 counts in, 7 held, 8 released. The rhythm her father had drilled into her 10,000 times in a barn outside Billings, Montana on mornings so cold her fingers went numb on the stock. She had hated those mornings. She would have given anything to be standing in that barn right now. She counted targets through the scope, 18 visible on the ridgeline, 19, 20. Her shoulder was on fire. She ignored it. Rourke's voice broke through the radio, static tight controlled a man, doing everything right and knowing it might not be enough. The suppressive fire from Alpha's position was losing ground. She could hear it in the intervals. The pauses getting longer, the responses getting shorter. She had 13 rounds left. 13 rounds, a damaged shoulder, a rifle she hadn't touched in 3 years, and a promise she had already broken. She pressed her cheek against the stock. 4 counts in, 7 held. Dad, she said to no one, I hope you've been watching. 8 out. The crosshairs settled. 12 days earlier, the supply tent at FOB Bravo smelled like sterile gauze and diesel fuel, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from having a skill you have promised never to use. The tent was organized with a precision that would have surprised anyone who bothered to look. Most supply clerks arranged their inventory by category. Nora Hartley arranged hers by priority sequence, the order in which a field medic would need each item when someone was bleeding out and the clock was already running. Tourniquet packs on the left side upper shelf position so a right hand would fall on them naturally in the dark. Combat gauze below that, chest seals at eye level. Needle decompression kits in the second drawer, not the third. 4 bags hanging from the crossbar at an angle that made the labels readable from 6 feet away. She had never explained the system to anyone. No one had ever asked. FOB Bravo occupied a low plateau in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, pressed up against the eastern slope of the Hindu Kush, like something the mountains had exhaled and forgotten. In August, the temperature hit 108 by noon, and the dust got into everything, your water, your weapons, your sleep. The mountain peaks to the north were permanent and specific in the way that only very old things can be. They had been there before the war. They would be there after. Nora had been at FOB Bravo for 11 days. She had checked her inventory every morning, not because it needed checking, because it gave her hands something to do. Raymond Hartley had been 6 feet 2 inches tall, 190 pounds, with the kind of stillness in his hands that most men have to spend their whole careers trying to learn. He had served 2 tours Fallujah in 2004, Kunar Province in 2007. He had been a USMC scout sniper, and he had been very good at it, and he had come home both times. The third thing that killed him wasn't an enemy combatant. It was a cluster of malignant cells in his right lung that the VA hospital in Great Falls finally identified in the spring of 2012 when Nora was 19 years old and just beginning to understand that her father was not the kind of man who got sick. He was the kind of man who showed up, who did the work, who believed with a certainty that bordered on theology that the gap between the man who survived and the man who didn't came down to preparation, to what you had put into your hands and your mind before the moment arrived. He had started teaching her when she was 12. Not because he wanted a soldier. He had been clear about that over and over in the barn outside Billings on those cold mornings with the stopwatch and the targets. He had taught her because he believed 2 skills were the same skill in different clothes. The rifle and the tourniquet, the ability to project force, and the ability to sustain life. Both required you to master your hands under pressure. Both required you to override the parts of your brain that wanted to run. Both came down to the same thing in the end, the capacity to act precisely when everything around you was imprecise. He had made her practice tourniquet application until she could do it with one hand blindfolded in under 25 seconds. He had made her practice breath control until a 600-meter shot felt as natural as exhaling. He had drilled anatomy and ballistics and field emergency medicine in alternating sessions because he thought separating them was a mistake. Use both hands, baby girl. That's the whole lesson. Everything else is detail. By the time she was 17, she was better than him on a long shot. He had told her so directly without ceremony on a Tuesday morning in October. Then he had handed her the Barrett and told her to do it again. The cancer took 3 years to finish what it started. He died in a VA hospital in February 2015, with Nora's hand in his and the particular smell of institutional disinfectant trying and failing to cover everything else. She had made two promises before he was gone. The first one was to him. Promise me you won't shoot in combat. His grip had been weak but insistent, his eyes completely clear. You have those hands. Use them to save people. That's the path now, she had promised. The second was to her mother. Ruth Hartley had folded the funeral flag against her chest in the rain outside the church in Billings, and she had looked at her daughter with the expression of a woman who had already decided she could not survive another loss of the same kind. Promise me. Promise you won't go after what he went after. Promise you'll come home. Nora had promised that too. Two promises, both sacred, both she had believed permanent. She had enrolled in Navy corpsman training 6 months later. Top 5% at Great Lakes Naval Station. Top 2% at Field Medical Service School Camp Lejeune. She was good at the medicine. She had always been good at the medicine. She had requested supply assignment at FOB Bravo Helmand Province because she wanted to serve in a place that needed serving. Not because she was hiding. She told herself that. Most mornings she almost believed it. The day Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rourke walked into her supply tent, Nora was counting bandage rolls she had already counted twice. He was 6 feet 230, built like something assembled for function rather than appearance. 14 years with SEAL Team 6 had left marks that weren't all visible. He wore his M4 on a single-point sling with the casual competence of a man who had long since stopped thinking about it. Dust from the range covered his uniform. His eyes did a single fast sweep of the tent interior, the kind of sweep that clocked exits and occupants before it registered anything else. Supply, he said. He didn't say it as a greeting. He said it as a category, Hartley Nora said. She did not look up from the clipboard. Right, he stepped inside. I need 30 quick clot packs, deploying tomorrow. She looked up then. You currently have 26 packs, Chief. That's within standard loadout for a team your size. He blinked. How do you know my team's inventory? I know everyone's inventory. It's my job. My job is getting you to hand me supplies when I ask. Nora set the clipboard down on the shelf beside her. She turned to face him fully. Your job tonight, she said, is going through a door with a 12-man team and inadequate chest seals. You have 6. For a team that size on a raid package, you need at least 16. I'd suggest 20 if you're taking the lead stack. The silence that followed was a particular kind of silence. The kind that happens when someone says something accurate that you were not prepared to hear. Rourke looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not respect, not yet. Something closer to recalibration. You track everyone's medical gear, he said. Yes. Why Nora reached past him to the shelf without looking, pulled down a box of chest seals and set it on the table between them. Because when someone gets hit, they're not going to have time to check what they're carrying. They need to know their gear is complete before they step outside the wire. I make sure it is. Rourke looked at the box of chest seals, then at her. Then he picked up the box without being told twice. That's more than supply work, he said. Then your expectations need adjusting, Chief. He almost smiled. He left without saying anything else. Nora picked up the clipboard, made a notation. Rourke's team chest seals restocked to 20, mission ready. Her hands were steady. Good. The man arrived at FOB Bravo on a Thursday afternoon in a transport vehicle with no markings, wearing field utilities, with no rank insignia visible, and carrying nothing except a single bag, and the particular bearing of someone who had spent a long career not needing to announce himself. Colonel James Aldrich was 57 years old. He had served in the Marine Corps for 31 years. He had been Raymond Hartley's commanding officer in Kunar Province, and before that his spotter in Fallujah, and before that, by his own account, the man Raymond had beaten handily on a qualification course in 1999, and who had never quite let him forget it. He had been at the funeral in Billings, standing in the back in civilian clothes in the rain. Nora saw him the moment he stepped out of the vehicle. 50 meters of open ground between them. The afternoon heat rising off the gravel in visible waves. The FOB moving around them at its usual controlled pace, vehicles, personnel equipment, the background noise of a place that didn't stop. He found her across the distance the way people do when they are looking specifically, not generally. 1 second of direct eye contact, a recognition that carried everything it needed to carry. Then just barely perceptible, a single small nod. Keep your head down. The message was as clear as if he had spoken it at full volume. Nora returned the nod, just as small, just as precise. Then she turned and walked back into the supply tent before anyone could notice what had just passed between them. She stood inside alone for a moment, set down the clipboard, pressed one hand flat against the shelf. He's here, she said to herself, which meant something was coming that Aldrich believed she needed to be present for. Raymond had always said Aldrich was a man who did not travel without a reason. She picked up the clipboard again, went back to her counts. The emergency briefing was at 1900 hours. Supply clerks were not normally included in mission briefings. The logic was reasonable operational details created operational risk, and people who did not need to know did not need to be in the room. Aldrich had specifically requested her presence. She arrived 4 minutes early and stood against the back wall. The room was crowded. 12 SEALs. Captain Derek Voss at the front, a lean, pale-eyed man of 42 who wore command the way some men wear a second skin. Maps on the wall behind him. Satellite imagery on the screen. The air tasted like Copenhagen and anticipation. Voss started without preamble. Intelligence confirms a Taliban IED cell operating 14 kilometers north. Commander Tariq Wardak, known specialist responsible for 3 convoy hits in this sector over the past 8 weeks. The cell has been moving. Tonight they've stopped. We have a window. Wardak's file photograph appeared on the screen. 41 years old, compact, dark-bearded, patient-faced. A man who had learned that ambushes worked better when you studied your target's habits first. He watches our response patterns, Voss said. He designs the next hit based on how we handled the last one. He has been doing this successfully for 11 months. He is not careless. Aldrich's voice came from the corner of the room. Captain, I'm recommending you take Cordman Hartley as backup medical on this operation. Every head turned. Nora felt the weight of the room shift onto her. She was still standing against the back wall with her clipboard, which suddenly felt like the wrong thing to be holding. Sir Rourke said. His voice was even. Professional. Hartley's supply. She hasn't been tested outside the wire. She's a qualified Navy corpsman. Aldrich did not raise his voice. Top 2% field medical service school. Her qualifications are not in question. With respect, Rourke said, qualifications and performance under fire are 2 different things. Then she'll get some experience tonight. The tone did not invite further discussion. Voss looked at Aldrich for 3 seconds, then nodded once. Hartley, you're coming. Nora's heart was doing something irregular inside her chest. This was not the plan. The plan was inventory and margins and staying useful without becoming visible. But orders were orders, and there was something in Aldrich's expression, not apology, not warning, that looked like inevitability. Yes, sir, she said. Voss caught her arm in the hallway after the briefing. Hartley, a word. They stepped to the side as the team filed past toward gear. Voss studied her with pale blue eyes that had been doing assessments for 2 decades. I don't know your history with Colonel Aldrich, he said. I don't need to. But if you're on my operation, you carry your weight. Can you handle trauma care under fire? I've trained for it, sir. Training isn't the same as the real thing. I understand that, sir. His eyes stayed on her face, looking for the thing that would tell him she would break. Are you frightened? Nora met his gaze. Yes, sir. Completely. Something moved in his expression. Almost approval. Good, he said. Fear keeps you sharp. Don't let it stop your hands. He walked away. Nora stood in the hallway alone for a moment, one hand against the plywood wall. Outside, the convoy was beginning to form up. She pushed off the wall and went to pack her ruck. The medical kit took her 35 minutes to pack, which meant she packed it in under 30 and then spent 5 minutes checking her work. Tourniquets, both side pouches positioned for ambidextrous access. Combat gauze, Z-folded main compartment. Chest seals, top pouch. Needle decompression kit, 14-gauge second, intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. She could find the landmarks in the dark, in the rain, with someone screaming in her ear. Her father had made sure of that. IV supplies. Morphine. Surgical airway kit for the moments when nothing else worked. 42 pounds when she finished. She lifted it, adjusted the straps, and then stood still for a moment in the empty tent. Her hands were the same hands that had packed this kit, the same hands that had gripped a Barrett at 1,000 meters, the same hands she had promised her father she would use only to save lives. I'm only carrying the rifle for protection, she said to the canvas wall. The canvas did not offer an opinion. She shouldered the ruck and walked out into the evening heat. Lieutenant Owen Tanner found her beside Humvee 3 at 2045. 33 years old, with the particular exhaustion behind his eyes that came from 8 months deployed without a real break. He was the primary combat medic for the team. She was the backup. He had been doing this job long enough to have opinions about backup. Hartley, he said. He looked at her the way a carpenter looks at someone else's work, measuring, not judging yet. Tanner, she said, the team calls you Doc. He smiled, brief. Probably should call you that too, huh? You're the Doc, sir? I'm Supply. He looked at her ruck, watched her hands for a moment without saying anything. If things go sideways tonight and I go down, can you handle it? Yes, sir. She said it the same way she would have said her own name. Not bravado, just the truth stated plainly. Tanner studied her face, then nodded once. Good enough, he said. Stay in the vehicle unless I tell you otherwise. This should be simple. It's Helmand in August, sir. He looked at her. And nothing in Afghanistan is simple, she said. He almost laughed. Then Voss's voice cut across the staging area. Mount up. The convoy rolled out at 2200. 4 Humvees, 12 operators, 1 medic, 1 supply clerk, who was not supposed to be there. The fob gates opened, and then the darkness of Helmand province swallowed them whole. Nora sat in Humvee 3 between Tanner and a SEAL she didn't know the name of yet, who hadn't said a word since the briefing. Her ruck sat between her boots. Her rifle rested across her lap, safety on chamber empty. The night vision gear on her helmet made the world into shades of green and grain. She watched FOB Bravo disappear in the side mirror. Rourke was in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. She could see the outline of his shoulders through the glass, the slight forward lean of a man who was already working the problem. She thought about her father. Not the way she usually thought about him. The slow grief of it, the absence shaped exactly like a person, but the other way, the concrete way. His hands demonstrating the same motion for the 100th time. His voice even patient again. His stillness on the firing line, which was not the stillness of inaction, but of absolute readiness. She thought about what he would have said if he'd known she was in this vehicle. He would have said, your hands know what to do. Get out of their way. The convoy moved through darkness for 40 minutes. The mountains to the north were visible as black mass against the sky thick with stars. The Hindu Kush had no opinion about the people moving through their foothills. They had been there when Alexander came through. They would be there when the last helicopter lifted off. Voss's voice on the radio, all elements hold position. Scouts forward. The convoy stopped, engines idling. 2 SEALs dismounted from the lead vehicle and disappeared into the darkness so quickly they seemed to become part of it. Night vision made them visible for 4 seconds. Then they were gone. In the silence, Nora could hear her own heartbeat. She controlled her breathing. 4 in. 7 hold. 8 out. The radio crackled at the 17-minute mark. The scouts had eyes on target. No exterior security. 2 structures showing lights. It looked quiet. Voss all elements advance. Humvees 1 and 2 establish overwatch. 3 and 4 move to compound. Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1. The world ended. The IED detonated under Humvee 1 with a sound that Nora would never afterward be able to fully describe. It wasn't an explosion in the way that word suggests. It was more like the air itself making a decision, a sudden violent refusal of the space it had been occupying. Light, pressure, a physical wave that hit Humvee 3 like an open hand and rocked it sideways on its axles. Then the gunfire started, a K-47s from 3 positions simultaneously. A PKM machine gun from the ridgeline to the east, its distinctive heavy drumming unmistakable. Muzzle flashes in the darkness, bright and brief and multiplying. This was not a patrol encountering resistance. This was a trap that had been waiting. Wardak had watched the convoy patterns for 2 months. He knew when to spring it. Rourke's voice on the radio flat and fast. Humvee 1 is hit. Vehicle destroyed. Multiple casualties. All elements return fire. Through the armored glass of Humvee 3, Nora could see it, the lead vehicle on its side burning. Figures crawling away from the wreckage, one that wasn't moving at all. Tanner grabbed his ruck. He was out the door before Nora could speak. She watched him run through a curtain of tracer fire. She watched him reach the first casualty and begin working. She watched the dark stain spread across his left shoulder, the impact registering half a second before she understood what she was seeing. He kept working, one arm going wrong, blood running down the other hand, still doing the chew. Then he went down. He tried to get up. Got one knee up, arm shaking, and went down again. Nora counted 4 casualties from the ambush. And now Tanner, who was the only trained medic, bleeding out in the open, still trying to reach the man in front of him. Her ruck was already in her hands. What are you doing? The SEAL beside her, eyes wide under his, nods. She kicked the door open. Hartley, that was Rourke's voice on the radio. He could see her. He was telling her no. She ran, 42 pounds on her back. 118 pounds of the rest of her moving as fast as it could toward burning metal, and men who were dying faster than anyone was fixing them. Bullets cracked past the supersonic snap that is nothing like the sound effects in movies. The sound of something moving faster than sound that would have ended everything if its geometry had been 2 inches different. She didn't stop. Tanner first. She dropped beside him. The shoulder wound was arterial. She knew it from the color and the rate before she had even gotten her hands on it. Shut up and let me work. Cat tourniquet from the left side pouch. High on the upper arm, 2 inches above the wound margin. One-handed lock rod through the slot. Turn, turn, turn until the arterial pulse in her fingers stopped feeling the spray. 21 seconds. Tanner looked at his own arm, then at her. That's correct placement. I said, shut up. She was already moving. The second casualty was a SEAL named Jennings, 26 years old, and he was not breathing. Chest completely still, face going gray. She knew this one. Tension pneumothorax, air trapped in the chest cavity, pressure building. The lung on one side collapsed entirely, the heart being pushed sideways away from where it needed to be. Minutes to death without intervention. Her father's voice in her memory, not asking but reciting landmarks, landmarks, landmarks. Don't reach. Find them with your fingers. Second intercostal space. Mid-clavicular line. Feel the ribs. Count up from the bottom. She ripped open Jennings's vest. Found the landmarks. Counted. The 14-gauge needle went in without hesitation in. The hiss was audible even over the gunfire. Trapped air releasing. Pressure equalizing. Jennings's chest expanded on one side and then the other, and color began returning to his face in the way color returns slowly, then suddenly. Someone materialized beside her, another SEAL. She didn't look up to identify him. Oxygen, she said. 15 liters non-rebreather mask. Now, she was already at the third man. The work was tunnel narrow and total. Gunfire as background noise. Explosions at a distance she was not calculating. Rourke's voice on the radio, organizing the defensive positions around her, adapting to the ambush with the practiced coherence of a team that had done this before. Third casualty, chest wound, right lateral. The sucking sound she'd been trained to identify from 20 feet away. Vented chest seal, 3-sided. 2 minutes. Fourth casualty, traumatic amputation, left leg below the knee. Severed cleanly by the secondary fragmentation. Tourniquet high on the thigh, as high as the anatomy allowed. Tight enough to do the job. The man screamed. I know, she said. You're going to live. That's what matters. Morphine autoinjector. 10 milligrams uninjured thigh. The screaming faded to something quieter. She stood up. 4 critical casualties. All stabilized. The gunfire was still happening. The valley was still a bad place to be. But the men who had been dying were not dying anymore. 11 minutes had passed since the IED Voss appeared beside her. Blood from a cut above his right eye, running freely, which he was ignoring. He looked at her, looked at the 4 men she had been working on, looked at her hands. What did you just do, he said. My job, sir. The helicopters came in 14 minutes later. 2 Black Hawks rotors hammering the dust into a wall. The flight medic helped load Tanner first. Tanner was conscious, pale, watching Nora with an expression she didn't have a word for. You saved my life, he said as they moved his stretcher. That's the job. No, his voice was firm. The voice of a man who knew the difference. I've been doing this 8 years. What you did out there, that wasn't training. That was mastery. She didn't respond. Moved to the next patient. The flight medic stopped her before the birds lifted off. Who did this initial care? I did. He checked her name tape. You there, Doc? No. That's Tanner. He's one of the casualties. Then who? I'm the supply clerk, she said. The medic stared at her for a long moment, in the rotor wash, in the noise. Supply clerks don't perform needle decompression at that speed, he said. And they don't apply tourniquets like that in the dark under fire. Nora looked at him. Navy corpsman, she said. Qualified at Great Lakes and Field Med School. I'm assigned to supply for personal reasons. The medic shook his head slowly, then nodded once. Well, Corpsman Hartley, you just saved 4 lives. Best pre-hospital care I've seen in a long time. The helicopters lifted off and the darkness took them. The convoy limped back to Faux Bravo at 0300. Nora sat in Humvee 3 in silence, her uniform covered in blood that was not hers. The ruck was between her boots again. The rifle was across her lap. Neither one felt like the right thing to be holding. Rourke turned around from the passenger seat. The FOB lights were visible ahead, pale rectangles in the black. He looked at her for a moment. Something had changed in his face, not softened exactly. Reoriented, Doc, he said. She looked up. I called you supply. He paused. I was wrong to dismiss what I didn't know. You didn't know, Chief. That's not an excuse. He held her gaze. What I saw out there tonight, I've worked with corpsmen for 15 years. That was exceptional. Under fire. Under those conditions. From the driver's seat, a voice. Where did you really train? Great Lakes. Field med school. And the rest of it. It wasn't a question. Nora looked at her hands. My father, she said. Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Hartley. In the front seat, a long silence. Then Hawkeye Hartley. Yes. Nobody said anything else until the gates opened. Aldrich was waiting in the staging area when the convoy parked. He did not approach her. Did not signal anything. He simply stood at the edge of the light and watched her step down from the vehicle with her bloody ruck and her unused rifle, and his expression carried something she recognized from the barn in Montana, from the cold mornings and the stopwatch and the 10,000 repetitions. The look of a man who had been waiting for something he already knew was coming. He reached into the breast pocket of his utilities and removed an envelope. Worn at the corners, yellowed slightly at the edges, the kind of color that said 3 years in a pocket close to the body. He held it out to her. Raymond wrote this 3 weeks before he died, Aldrich said. He asked me to deliver it when the moment was right. He placed the envelope in her hands. Then he walked away without another word. Nora stood alone in the middle of the staging area while the team secured vehicles and carried gear and did all the work that came after a bad night. The FOB was loud and purposeful around her. The mountains beyond the wire were invisible in the dark. She looked at the envelope, her father's handwriting on the front. Just her name. No address, no date. Nora. She opened it. The note inside was short. Raymond Hartley had never been a man for long letters. If Colonel Aldrich is giving you this, you're already where you need to be. The work you did tonight matters. Don't let the promise stop you from being who you are. The promise was to protect your mother from fear. It was never meant to stop your hands. I trained you for both. That was always the point. Both hands, baby girl. Use them. I'll be with you, Dad. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully along the original creases, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in her breast pocket next to the photograph she had carried for 3 years. Raymond, in his dress blues rifle at his side, the inscription on the back worn soft from handling. She pressed one hand flat against her chest for a moment. The mountains beyond the wire were invisible. The sky above them was enormous and full of stars. I hear you, Dad, she said quietly. Around her, the FOB kept moving, and somewhere in the dark beyond the wire, Tariq Wardak was already planning the next trap. The debrief happened at 07:30 in Voss's office, which was 4 plywood walls and a desk and maps that covered every surface, including part of the floor. Voss had not slept. It showed in the way he held himself, not tired exactly, but compressed, like a man carrying additional weight and redistributing it deliberately. He told her to sit. She sat. For 30 seconds, he looked at her without speaking. The Combat Support Hospital had called at 0600. All 4 casualties were stable. Tanner's shoulder had been operated on, and he would keep the arm. Jennings was breathing independently. The SEAL with the chest wound had his lung back. The man who had lost his leg below the knee was already on transport to Landstuhl. The head surgeon Voss said assumed Tanner had provided the initial care. When I told him Tanner was one of the casualties, he asked me to repeat myself. Nora waited. Voss leaned forward and placed both hands flat on the desk. Who are you, Hartley? Really? Navy Corpsman, Great Lakes top 5%. Field Medical Service, School Camp Lejeune, top 2%. She paused. Requested supply assignment for personal reasons. People with your qualifications don't request supply. Her hand moved to the breast pocket where the letter was. In unconscious motion, she stopped halfway. My father was Raymond Hartley, she said. Voss already knew. She could see it in his face. He had spent the hours between the convoy's return and this debrief making calls. Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Hartley, he said. Hawkeye, Fallujah Kunar, 157 confirmed kills. One of the finest scout snipers the Marine Corps produced in the last 30 years. Yes, sir, he trained you from age 12 to 17. Medicine and marksmanship both. Voss sat back, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. And the supply assignment. Before my father died, she said I made him a promise, that I would use my hands to save lives, not take them. She kept her voice even, that I would serve as a healer, not a shooter. Voss was quiet for a moment. Last night you ran through direct fire to reach 4 casualties. Yes, sir. Under conditions that would have kept most trained operators in their vehicle. I did my job, sir. No, his voice was not harsh. It was precise. What you did last night was not supply work. It was not even standard corpsman work. It was elite-level trauma care in a live ambush executed correctly without hesitation on men you had never treated before. He held her gaze. Tanner is out for 6 weeks minimum. We need medical support I can trust. Nora said nothing. Effective immediately, Voss said you are redesignated. Combat Medical Officer. You maintain supply responsibilities when operations allow. When we go outside the wire, you are our corpsman. Sir, I want to be clear about the limits of... That wasn't a proposed corpsman, Hartley. It was an order. Yes, sir. She stood to leave. Hartley, she stopped. Your father would have been proud of what you did last night. She nodded once. Left before her face could do something she would regret. The hallway outside Voss's office was empty. She stood against the plywood wall for a moment and pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum and breathed until everything was back where it belonged. She was the corpsman now. That was the job. That was within the promise. She told herself that, picked up her clipboard, went back to work. Casey Flynn found her in the supply tent an hour later. Flynn was 31, HM1, with an economy of expression that Nora had initially read as coldness and had gradually come to understand was simply precision. Flynn said things when they needed saying and not before. She had been watching Nora since the ambush with the quiet attention of someone assembling a picture one piece at a time. She stood in the doorway of the tent for a moment without speaking. Then she came in and picked up one of the tourniquets from the shelf. Examined the placement. Set it back exactly where it had been. You pack like you've done this in the field, Flynn said. I packed it the way I was trained. Flynn looked at her. Your father's training. It wasn't a question. Nora didn't treat it like one. Yes. Flynn nodded once. That was all. She left without saying anything else. Nora stood alone in the tent with the count she'd been doing and a sense that Flynn had said precisely what she intended to say and nothing more. The intelligence briefing came 6 days later at 2100 hours. The room was the same room, the same maps, the same satellite images, the same weight of operational reality pressing against every flat surface. Nora had attended 3 briefings since the first ambush, standing in the second row. Now Voss had placed her there. Rourke was in the front. He had not called her supply since the night of the ambush. He had not called her anything that wasn't Doc or Hartley. For Rourke, that was the equivalent of a formal apology, and she had accepted it as such. Flynn sat beside her, watching, saying nothing. Voss did not ease into it. Route 611, he said. 36 hours, a Marine supply convoy, 43 personnel, 6 vehicles, standard escort package, is scheduled to move north along that corridor. We have confirmed intelligence that Wardak is positioning an ambush. Staggered IEDs, elevated firing positions, a vehicle kill zone at the third bend. The satellite image showed the road as a pale line through dark terrain. The bend in question was obvious once you knew to look for it. High ground on 3 sides. No egress to the west. 43 people, Voss said. And Wardak designed this one specifically based on what didn't work last time. The room absorbed that. We need a designated marksman in Overwatch. Elevated position 800 meters from the kill zone before the convoy moves. One shooter who can hold that ridge, disrupt Wardak's command and control before the convoy reaches the bend and change the entire geometry of what he's planned. He paused. Petty Officer Daniels broke his collarbone in a training accident this morning. He is out of action. I have requested a replacement from Kandahar. They cannot get anyone here in 36 hours. The silence was a specific kind. The kind that happened when a room full of people did the same arithmetic simultaneously and arrived at the same answer. Flynn looked at Nora. Not pointedly, just looked. Aldrich spoke from the back corner of the room. There is another option, he said. Nora's chest tightened. Aldrich did not look at her. He addressed the room. Corpsman Hartley has qualifications beyond what's on her service record. Her father was Raymond Hartley. Most of you know that name. What you may not know is that Raymond trained his daughter in precision marksmanship for 5 years. She qualified expert in civilian competition at 17. 98th percentile nationally. Raymond told me personally that by the time she was 17, she was outperforming him at distance. The room was completely still. I am not making a recommendation, Aldrich said. I am providing information. The decision belongs to Captain Voss and to Corpsman Hartley. Voss looked at her. Every person in the room looked at her. Nora thought about 43 people on a road in 36 hours who did not know what was waiting for them at the third bend. She thought about her father's letter in her breast pocket. She thought about 2 promises and what they had cost her and what it would cost everyone else if she kept them tonight. She stood. Permission to call my mother, sir. I need to speak with her before I give you an answer. Voss nodded once. 1 hour, Corman. She walked out of the operations center into the August night. The stars over Helmand were the same stars that were visible from Billings, Montana, if you looked from the same sky. She had not thought of that before. She sat on an equipment case outside the comms tent and waited for the satellite connection to route through. The phone rang 3 times. Ruth Hartley answered on the fourth ring the way she always had, never on the first, because she believed that answer too eagerly. Nora. Her mother's voice was clear through the static. What's wrong? You sound like something's wrong. Nora had planned what she was going to say. She had planned it carefully in the 4 minutes between the operations center and the equipment case. The words had seemed adequate in the planning. They did not seem adequate now. Mom, she said, I need to tell you something. I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Of course. There are 43 Marines who are going to die tomorrow on a road called Route 611 if someone doesn't stop an ambush that's already in place. She kept her voice steady. I can make the shot that stops it. I am probably the only person here who can. But if I do it, I break the promise I made to Dad, and the one I made to you. The static on the line breathed. She waited. Ruth Hartley was 61 years old. She had been married to a Marine Scout sniper for 22 years. She had learned in that time the particular discipline of not speaking until you had thought through the full weight of what you were going to say. Nora, she said finally, I need to tell you something I haven't told you before. Nora said nothing. Your father called me from the VA the night before he died. Not the last night, the night before that. He was having a clear hour, and he used it to call me. He said, her voice tightened and then steadied. He said, Ruth, when the time comes, and you'll know it when it does, let her go. Don't hold her to what I asked. I asked it for you, not for her. The static breathed again. I didn't understand it then, Ruth said. I was so deep in losing him that I couldn't think past the next hour. So I kept holding on to the promise because it felt like it was still a piece of him, a way to keep you close to me and away from the thing that she stopped. Mom. I was wrong, Ruth said. The words came out simply without performance. I was a grieving woman who made you carry something that was mine to carry, not yours. Nora pressed her free hand against her knee. Your father didn't train you for trophies, Ruth said. He didn't spend 5 years teaching you those things so they could sit unused in a barn in Montana. He trained you because he believed that saving a life and protecting a life were the same work. He said that to me 100 times. I just wasn't ready to hear it. The mountains beyond the wire were dark shapes against a dark sky. Very old, very patient, Go, Ruth said. Make the shot, save those people. And when you're done, you call me and tell me about it. Nora's eyes were burning. She let them burn. Your father isn't disappointed in you, Ruth said. He's never been disappointed in you, not once. Nora could not speak for a moment. I know, Mom, she said finally. I love you, baby. I love you too. The line cut. The static fell away. She sat alone on the equipment case under the Helmand stars and let the silence settle around her until it was something she could work with. Then she stood, pressed her hand once against her breast pocket, and walked back to the operations center. The range was dark except for the lights at the firing line. Someone had set up 5 targets at 500 meters. The downrange area was empty and quiet, and the night air had cooled enough that her breath was visible when she exhaled. Half the team was there. She had not asked them to come. They had come anyway. Rourke stood to one side with his arms crossed, not performing judgment, just present. Flynn was near the scoring scope. Aldrich was further back in shadow, which was where he preferred to be. Someone had placed a Barrett M82A1 on the shooting bench. Nora looked at it, 30 pounds, 50 caliber. The same model her father had trained her on from the age of 12, because he had believed that if you were going to learn precision work, you should learn it on the hardest platform, and everything after would feel like an accommodation. She picked it up. The weight was familiar, the way an old conversation is familiar. Not comfortable exactly. Known. She moved to the firing line, set the bipod, adjusted the height for her frame. She spent 40 seconds making adjustments without being asked if she needed help. Nobody offered. She checked the scope, made 2 small corrections to windage. The wind tonight was running at 6 knots from the southwest steady, which was the best possible condition for a first shot in 3 years. She settled into position. The stock found her shoulder. Her cheek found the weld. Her eye found the scope, and the first target resolved into clarity at 500 meters, a steel silhouette center mass visible and specific. Nobody spoke. She let her heart rate come down. Not forced, just waited for it. 4 counts in, 7 held, 8 released. Her father's voice in the back of her mind, not instructing, just present. Natural point of aim. Let the rifle settle. Don't chase the crosshairs. Wait for them to arrive. The crosshairs found center mass on their own. She pressed the trigger. The Barrett fired with a concussion that compressed the air around her and drove the stock back into her shoulder with 30 pounds of controlled violence. Downrange, the first target disappeared from its mount. Hit. Center mass, Flynn's voice from the scope. Quiet, factual. Nora cycled the bolt. The spent case ejected. She loaded the next round and found the second target before the echo had fully died. Breathe. Press. Hit. Center mass. Third target. Fourth. Fifth. 5 rounds. 5 hits. All center mass. Under 2 minutes. She cleared the weapon and stood up and turned around. Rourke was not looking at the targets. He was looking at her hands. Flynn lowered the spotting scope. 3 years, Flynn said. She hasn't touched a rifle in 3 years. Nobody in the small group spoke for a moment. Rourke uncrossed his arms. He looked at Nora with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, not surprised because he had been processing what she was for the past 6 days. Something more like the settling of a long question. Her father taught her well, he said. Voss stepped forward. Can you make the shot? 875 meters. Night conditions. Variable wind. Nora looked at the Barrett in her hands. Yes, sir. You're certain? Yes, sir. Voss nodded once. He turned to the group. She's our marksman. Mission brief in 30 minutes. Nobody had a problem with that. The ridge position was a shelf of loose rock and pale scrub at 890 meters from the target compound, reached after 40 minutes of careful movement in the dark. 2 SEALs had gone ahead to clear it. Nora climbed it with the Barrett slung across her back and the medical ruck on her hips, and Rourke 2 steps behind her, which was not condescension, but protocol. She settled into position at 0315. The compound below sat in a shallow valley with a dry watercourse running east of it. 2 structures, lights in the windows of the larger one. A courtyard between them, empty now. Her range card put the main building at 875 meters. Wind check. 7 knots left to right. Variable gusts up to 9. She ran the elevation and windage calculations and confirmed them against the data book she had built during the approach. Her father had made her keep data books. Memory was for the shot, he had said. Math was for the paper. She settled in and began her wait. 43 minutes passed. This was the part most people did not understand about the work. The shot itself was the smallest fraction of the time. The waiting was the work. Staying still in a body that wanted to move. Keeping the mind clear without letting it drift. Her father had made her lie in a field outside Billings for 4 hours, once perfectly still, with a target at 600 meters, told her to wait for a cue he never specified, just to practice the waiting. She had understood it at the time. She understood it more fully now. Movement in the courtyard at 0358, a single figure emerging from the larger structure. Medium height, dark coat, something in his right hand that resolved into a satellite phone as he moved into better light. Possible target. The voice from the spotting scope was quiet. The figure walked to the secondary structure, paused, then moved to the near window and stood framed by the interior light in the way that people stand when they are focused on something in their hand and not thinking about windows or ridgelines. Confirmed target ID, Voss said. 30 seconds. That's him. That's Wardak. Voss on the radio. Base, we have positive identification. Requesting permission to engage. The response came back in under 15 seconds. Permission granted. Eliminate the target. Voss looked at Nora. Her finger moved to the trigger. She began the press. Then the wind changed, not dramatically. A gust from the north crossing the primary wind, shifting the effective vector in a way her calculations had not fully accounted for. The shot broke before she had completely corrected. The Barrett fired. Downrange, the wall behind Wardak shattered at a point 8 inches left of where she had been aiming. He dropped below the window line instantly. Professional response, not panic. Miss, the spotter's voice was flat and descriptive. Nora was already cycling the bolt. Rourke controlled wind change. He'll check the wall. Give him the moment. She had already adjusted. Her father had said many times that the first shot failed occasionally. Equipment went adrenaline. Didn't matter why. What mattered was the second shot. She loaded the fresh round, found the window again. Wardak was moving inside, checking the impact point, assessing. He reached out and touched the shattered section of wall, looked at the angle. She could see him processing the trajectory, the approximate origin, the distance implied. He was raising his phone. Nora did not rush. 4 counts in, 7 held, the crosshairs settled, 8 out. She pressed the trigger on the exhale in the pause between heartbeats exactly the way we had been taught in a barn outside Billings on a morning in October when her father had put down the stopwatch and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. The Barrett fired, 0.8 of a second. Through the scope, Wardak fell, not the movie version of falling, the actual version which was sudden and complete and without recovery. The phone hit the window frame. His hand stayed on the wall for a fraction of a second longer than the rest of him, and then that too was gone. Hit. Target down. Voss on the radio. Base target neutralized. Confirm kill. Ground team confirms. Target down. The ridge was quiet. The valley below was quiet. Somewhere north of them, 43 Marines were sleeping toward a morning that was now going to look different than the one Wardak had designed for them. Nora lowered the Barrett. Her hands were not shaking. She had expected them to shake. Rourke put a hand briefly on her shoulder, said nothing, took it away. Flynn from the spotting scope position looked at her once with the expression of someone who has confirmed something they already knew. That was all. The cash briefing happened at 1400 the following afternoon. Voss stood at the front. His face had the particular quality it got when the situation required him to be precise about things that were not good. Wardak is dead, he said. His IED cell is disrupted. Route 611 is clear. That would have been enough. It was not the whole briefing. One of Wardak's couriers was picked up near Gereshk this morning. What he was carrying changes our operational picture. He pulled up the satellite imagery. Weapons cache, 15 kilometers northwest. Mountain compound built into the eastern face existing defensive positions. Stinger missiles man-portable air defense enough units to threaten rotary wing operations across this entire sector. He let that settle. If these weapons get distributed to Wardak's network, we lose medevac capability. Every casualty in this sector becomes a non-transport. Resupply becomes a ground-only operation. Air support disappears for anything lower than 10,000 feet. He paused. We have a 36-hour window before the cache moves. Intelligence believes Wardak's death has accelerated their timeline. Rourke studied the compound image. How many defending? 60 to 80. Prepared positions. They know the terrain. The room absorbed that. Standard force package for this kind of target was 100 plus with air support on call. Voss had 12 operators and a corpsman. We go anyway, Voss said, because if we don't, the cost in the following 6 months is larger than the cost tonight. He looked around the room. Casualty estimates are 25 to 30%. I want everyone clear on that before we discuss the operational plan. Nobody moved. Voss looked at Nora. We need integrated medical and precision fire capability on this operation. Both roles same person, treating casualties and providing overwatch, transitioning between them as the situation requires. Can you do it? She thought about what that meant in practice. The physical weight of both kits. The mental weight of two priorities that would pull in different directions simultaneously. She thought about what her father had said about the rifle and the tourniquet being the same tool. She thought about what it would mean to have that capability tonight and choose not to use it. What's the specific requirement, she said. Immediate trauma care for any casualties. Precision fire from overwatch positions. Full medical load, plus the Barrett ready to transition between roles with no preparation time. Rourke spoke. Doc, that's close to your own body weight in gear. She looked at him. I know what it weighs, Chief. The room was quiet. Can you do both simultaneously, Voss said. Not sequentially, simultaneously, treating a casualty while maintaining tactical awareness, engaging a target, and then returning to medicine within seconds. Her father had drilled exactly this. Not as a drill, but as a philosophy. The hands don't get to choose what they do. The situation chooses. The hands just have to be ready for everything. Yes, sir. Voss nodded. You're our integrated operator. Brief at 2,000. Wheels up at 2,200. The medical ruck took her 35 minutes to pack. Same precision, same priority sequence, same attention to access speed for ambidextrous retrieval. 3 additional items based on the casualty profile the intelligence brief suggested. The Barrett was clean and zeroed. She had rechecked the zero that afternoon after the wind change on the Wardak shot, not because it was off, because she needed her hands to have done it. Total load, 85 pounds. Medical ruck Barrett M4 as secondary ammunition for both. She lifted it all adjusted, walked the length of the supply tent twice and back. Flynn appeared in the doorway. Flynn came inside. Without asking, she began checking the ruck strap adjustments, not redoing them, just confirming the load distribution was balanced correctly for Nora's frame. If something goes wrong in there tonight, Flynn said, really wrong, you're going to have to choose in the moment. Medical or shooting, Your brain is going to want to put those in sequence. I know, your father's training put them in parallel. Yes. Flynn finished the strap check and stepped back. Then you're ready, Flynn said. That was all. At 2100, Nora stood beside the first Black Hawk on the tarmac. The rotors were beginning their cycle. The desert air tasted like exhaust and altitude. 85 pounds of weight across her frame, distributed as well as it could be distributed. Rourke stopped beside her. He reached into his breast pocket and held something out to her. His challenge coin. SEAL Team 6, the insignia she recognized from the ones she had seen others carry. She looked at him. You give that back when we're wheels down, he said. Not before. She took it, felt the weight of it, pressed it once against her palm. He turned and staged his pack on the bird without further ceremony. Tanner found her just before boarding, still in his sling, not cleared for operations. He had come to the tarmac anyway, the way men who have been saved by someone will sometimes show up at the departure point because it is the only thing they have available to offer, both hands, he said. That's all. She nodded. Voss's voice from the lead bird, mount up. She climbed aboard. The medical ruck pressed against her back. The Barrett sat between her knees. The coin was in her left breast pocket where the letter was. The Blackhawks lifted off at 2,000 to 200. Below FL Bravo shrank to a set of lights and then to nothing. The mountains came up on either side, enormous and dark, and then they were above the valley floor and moving northwest at speed. She pressed the coin once against her chest through the fabric. Both hands, she said quietly. Exactly as Tanner had said it. The helicopter banked north. The terrain moved beneath them. The compound was 15 kilometers ahead, built into a mountainside full of men who were waiting armed and prepared. She checked the Barrett once more by feel. Then the left side pouch where the first tourniquet sat. Ready for both. The flight took 18 minutes. At 2 minutes out, the crew chief held up 2 fingers. Nora closed her eyes, heart rate 66. The edge of fear was present, which was correct. Her hands were still. 1 minute. The Black Hawk began its descent into the valley. The moment the landing skids touched rock and the door came open, 3 things happened simultaneously. The first Black Hawk discharged 6 operators moving fast and low into the dark. The second Black Hawk was 50 meters behind 30 seconds from landing. The RPG came from the northeast ridgeline, smoke trail in the night vision, heading for the second bird. The second Black Hawk banked hard to avoid the shot. Not hard enough. The RPG detonated against the tail rotor section with a sound that was different from everything else, deep or final. The bird yawed, rotated on its axis, and came down 30 meters from the intended landing point at an angle that was not a landing. 6 operators from Nora's bird were already spreading into defensive positions. Rourke directing on the net voice flat and fast. Then the gunfire opened from 4 positions at once. Not 60 defenders. More than that. The intelligence estimate had been wrong in the direction intelligence estimates were always wrong in forward operating conditions. The firefight erupted full and complete in the time it takes to exhale. Nora was moving before she had made a conscious decision to move. The downed helicopter was 40 meters east, burning at the tail section, and there were people inside it who needed the kit on her back more urgently than anything else needed it right now. She ran, 85 pounds across 40 meters of broken rock with rounds cracking past. The supersonic snaps that no amount of experience fully normalized because the body had been correctly calibrated by evolution to understand what that sound represented. She covered the ground. The fragmentation struck her left shoulder. Not a direct hit. A secondary detonation from a grenade that had impacted rock 10 meters to her left and distributed its energy outward. A piece of casing traveling at a velocity that physics had determined without her input. It hit the joint. She knew what it was immediately, the way her father had said she would know things when they happen because the body understands damage to itself at a level that is faster than thought. The rotator cuff, the joint that managed every function of a shoulder that held a rifle. She knew what it meant. She filed that knowledge in the part of her mind where things went that she could not afford to spend time on right now and kept running. The helicopter wreckage was in front of her. She went to work. The pilot was gone. She checked, confirmed, moved on because medicine was triage before it was anything else. The co-pilot was alive. Compound fracture, right leg bone visible. Conscious, talking. She splinted the leg, immobilized it, administered morphine and told him not to move. Door gunner breathing shallowly, chest trauma, right side. She listened. The breath sounds told her what she needed to know. Needle decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. The same procedure she had performed on Jennings 11 days ago in a different valley with different fire and the same anatomy. The air hissed out. The breathing changed. She moved to the next. Second door gunner mobile minor wounds. She handed him a pressure dressing and told him to apply it to his own forearm and stay low. 4 minutes to stabilize the helicopter casualties. Then Voss's voice on the radio stripped of everything unnecessary. Nora, North Ridge, 20 fighters advancing on Alpha's position. 2 minutes to contact. She looked at the Barrett. She understood in that moment what her father had been building toward from the beginning. Not two skills. One capability divided into whichever expression the moment required. She had spent 3 years treating that division as a moral question. It had never been a moral question. It had always been a practical one. She set the Barrett on the edge of the helicopter wreckage, looked through the scope, found the ridge. The fighters were moving in coordinated bounds, covering each other, moving fast. She keyed the radio. I have eyes on the flanking force. I can engage. Voss, you're at the downed bird. Bird crew is stabilized. I'm engaging now. A pause of approximately 2 seconds, which was Voss calculating whether she was telling him the truth about the crew. Make it count, he said. She settled behind the Barrett. Every shot from this point was going to cost her something in the left shoulder. The recoil of a .50 caliber fired from a damaged rotator cuff was not a matter of pain tolerance. It was a matter of accumulating structural damage. She understood that. She had understood it from the moment the fragmentation hit. She began anyway. The first target was the squad leader. She could identify him by the way the others moved relative to him, the small orientations of people who are taking their cues from a single point. He was 980 meters out, moving northeast along the ridge. Wind, elevation, lead the target, press. The Barrett fired and the recoil drove through her damaged shoulder like compressed heat. Downrange, the squad leader went down. She cycled the bolt. The second target was the machine gunner setting up a PKM on the ridge crest. She took him before the weapon was fully deployed. Cycled, loaded. Found the third, and the shoulder was building towards something her hands could not stop. She filed it. Third target, fourth, fifth. The ridge fighters had identified that fire was coming from their left flank and were beginning to respond, which compressed her window. She moved faster. Not rushing, moving faster, which were different things. Sixth, seventh, eighth. At the 10th shot, the shoulder failed in a way that was qualitatively different from the previous 9. Not catastrophic. She could still use the arm. But she could feel the joint doing something it was not supposed to do with each recoil cycle, and the calculation of further damage versus remaining targets was not actually a calculation because there were still targets. 11th, 12th. The last target was a sniper who had found a position on the far end of the ridge at 1,240 meters, which was at the edge of what the Barrett was designed to do and past the edge of what a shooter with a compromised shoulder should be attempting. She thought about her father standing on a firing line in 1999, looking at a target at 1,200 meters and deciding it was possible. She thought about the Barrett in her hands, which was not the same Barrett, but was the same rifle in every way that mattered. 4 counts in. Her shoulder was on fire. 7 held. Her heart rate was 72. Higher than she wanted. 8 out. The crosshairs settled. She pressed the trigger. The recoil hit her shoulder like the answer to a question she had been asking for 3 years. 1,240 meters downrange, the last target fell. She lowered the Barrett. Her left arm was not functioning correctly. She was aware of this the way she was aware of the temperature and the wind as data relevant filed. She switched the Barrett to her right arm and keyed the radio. North Ridge, she said, 13 targets down. Remaining fighters are in retreat. Voss, after a pause, she recognized as a man recalibrating. Copy, Doc. All elements converge on Bird 2. We are extracting. She set the Barrett down. Looked at the co-pilot who was watching her from his position against the wrecked fuselage. You just did what I think you did, he said. She applied a fresh pressure dressing to her own shoulder one-handed with the efficiency of someone trained to manage field injuries. Stay still, she told him. QRF is coming. How long were you doing that? She thought about it. 90 seconds, she said. Give or take. He looked at her for a long moment. She pressed the dressing in place and looked up at the ridge, which was quiet now. Her father's voice was present in the way it was always present in the work, not instructing anymore, just there the way a foundation is there. Not something you feel in a specific moment, something you stand on. Voss and the remaining operators arrived 6 minutes later. Voss looked at the downed helicopter, looked at the stabilized crew, looked at the ridge, looked at Nora sitting against the fuselage with a one-handed pressure dressing on her own shoulder and the Barrett across her knees. He did not speak for a moment. Then, How many? 13. The rest pulled back. He looked at the ridge, looked back at her. Both hands, sir, she said. That's all it was. Rourke arrived 30 seconds later. He looked at her shoulder, looked at the Barrett, looked at the ridge. He said nothing. He knelt down beside her and put his hand over hers on the pressure dressing and held the pressure while she adjusted the bandaging with her right hand. That was all. 3 minutes later, the blood loss caught up with everything she had been ignoring, and she closed her eyes. The mountains above Helmand were exactly as they had been before any of this started. They would be the same after. She could hear the QRF helicopters in the distance growing louder. She held on to the coin in her breast pocket. Then she stopped thinking. She woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the sound of a generator running somewhere below the floor. The ceiling above her was plywood, which meant she was still at FOB Bravo. The light coming through the gap in the tent panel was the particular pale gold of early morning, not yet hot, not yet committed to the day. Her left arm was immobilized from the shoulder to the elbow in a brace that smelled like new plastic and felt like a decision someone had made without consulting her. The pain was present and specific in the way that pain is when the body has finished the emergency work and begun the accounting. She lay still and did the inventory her father had taught her whenever she came back to consciousness in a situation she had not expected to survive. Start at the feet, work up. Identify what is functional and what is not, and do not confuse the two. Feet, legs, right arm which moved when she asked it to, left shoulder which did not. She already knew what the shoulder was going to tell her. She had known since the moment the shrapnel hit. She had simply been busy with other things. Aldrich was sitting in the chair beside her bed. He was not reading and he was not looking at her. He was looking at his hands folded in his lap with the particular stillness of a man who has been keeping a long vigil and is no longer tracking the time. He looked up when she moved. She said nothing. He said nothing. The generator ran below them. The surgeon came in 10 minutes later, a lean man in his early 50s named Whitfield, who had the unhurried manner of someone who had delivered difficult news often enough to have found a pace for it. He sat on the edge of the second chair and looked at her chart first and then at her. Rotator cuff, he said, significant involvement of the supraspinatus and subscapularis. We removed 12 fragments during surgery. 3 required extraction under imaging. The joint is intact. She waited. Whitfield looked at her directly. You will have full function for most purposes, he said. Medicine, manual work, physical activity within normal parameters. The joint will heal. He paused. Precision long-range shooting at the level your file indicates you were operating at requires a specific quality of stability in that joint that this injury has compromised permanently. It is possible you may recover closer to that level with significant rehabilitation time. It is also possible you will not. I want to be honest with you about that. The ceiling was the same plywood it had been before he said it. She had already known. She had known at 1,240 meters when she pressed the trigger on the last shot and felt the joint do the thing it was not supposed to do. She had known it was the price and she had paid it because it was the correct price for what needed to be done. Knowing something and hearing it confirmed were still two different things. What about medicine, she said. Whitfield nodded once. Dexterity, pressure application, fine motor work, those will return with therapy. Full medical function within 4 to 6 months with consistent rehabilitation. She looked at her left arm in its brace. The rifle and the tourniquet were the same tool. Her father had said that for 5 years. He had not been speaking only about skill. He had been speaking about which one the situation required and about the wisdom to know the difference and about the willingness to use each one fully when it was needed. She had used the rifle fully. She had used it until it was gone. That was not a loss. That was a completion. All right, she said. Whitfield looked at her for a moment. I have been a trauma surgeon for 22 years, he said. I have treated a significant number of combat injuries. What you did last night, treating 4 casualties and then engaging 13 targets under fire with a shoulder wound, is not something I have clinical language for. He paused. It is outside the range of outcomes I would have predicted. She looked at him. My father did not believe in separating the skills, she said. Whitfield nodded slowly, as if that explained something he had been trying to categorize. He left her with instructions she had already memorized before he finished saying them. Aldrich remained in the chair after Whitfield left. He waited until the sound of the surgeon's boots had faded down the corridor. Then he looked at her. He said one thing. Raymond would have been very proud of you, Nora. She looked at the ceiling. He was proud of me before last night, she said. Yes, Aldrich said. He was, but not of what you did, of who you decided to be. He stood, smoothed his utilities, picked up his cover from the side table. I delivered the letter, he said. My job's done. He walked out. The generator ran. The morning light through the tent panel continued its slow, gold progress. She lay still for a long time. Sometime during the afternoon, she slept. When she woke the second time, the room was quiet and the light had shifted to the flat white of midday, and there was something on the table beside her bed that had not been there before. A challenge coin. Heavy brass worn on the edges in the way things get worn when they live in a pocket close to the body for a long time. She recognized the insignia on the front without picking it up. She picked it up. The back had been engraved. Not factory engraving. Hand engraving, the kind done with a tool and patience and a steadiness of purpose. 2 words. Both hands. She held it in her right palm and looked at it. There was no note. There was no Rourke. She had not heard him come in, and she had not heard him leave, which was consistent with everything she knew about the man. He communicated in the currency of presence and action and had no use for supplementary explanation. He had carried this coin for how long she did not know. It had weight and warmth from a decade of a pocket, probably more. Men like Rourke did not give away the things that mattered. They offered them to the people who had earned them without ceremony, without speech, in the precise economy of a language that required neither. She closed her fingers around it. Casey Flynn was sitting in the corner of the room. Nora had not seen her come in. Flynn had the capacity, which she shared with Aldrich and with very few other people Nora had encountered, of being present in a room without announcing herself. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at nothing in particular, in the posture of someone who had been there for a while. Flynn looked at her. Nora held up the coin. Flynn looked at it, then at Nora. Then she nodded once, a single small inclination of the head that contained everything that needed to be said, and looked away. The afternoon moved. Tanner came in the evening, which was the first time Nora had seen him since he boarded the medevac helicopter 6 days ago. His left arm was still in its sling, which he wore with the mild irritation of a man who considered immobility a personal affront. He looked pale in the way that people look when they have lost blood and are reconstructing it and have not quite finished. He sat in the chair that Aldrich had occupied that morning. 3rd time, he said. She looked at him. You've saved my life 3 times now. He said it factually the way he said most things. First night, my shoulder. If you hadn't applied that tourniquet when you did, I'd have bled out before the birds arrived. 2nd time is the surgery. The surgeon said my arm function is good because the initial care was correct. He paused. 3rd time is last night. Those stingers would have ended medevac capability for this entire sector. You stopped that, which means every person who gets hurt in Helmand in the next year who needs a helicopter has a helicopter because of what you did last night. She had not calculated it that way. She sat with it for a moment. I stopped counting favors, Tanner said. The math doesn't work in my favor. Start counting, she said. I'll collect eventually. He looked at the brace on her arm. How bad? She told him what Whitfield had said, plainly the way she said things. Tanner was quiet for a moment. The medicine is intact. Yes, then you're still Doc. She looked at the coin in her right hand. I'm still Doc, she agreed. He stayed for another 30 minutes. They did not talk the entire time. They sat in the particular companionable silence of people who have been through something together and do not need to perform the fact of it. When he left, he squeezed her right hand once at the door briefly and walked out without looking back. That was enough. Voss came the following morning. He stood at the foot of her bed with his hands behind his back and his pale blue eyes doing what they had done in the hallway after the first briefing, assessing without judgment. He told her what she had already been told, the casualty count, the mission outcome, the stingers recovered and destroyed. She listened because Voss was not a man who spoke without reason, and the reason he was telling her was not informational. It was respect offered in the form of completeness. The cache is neutralized, he said. The air corridor is clear. 43 Marines completed their route transit this morning without incident. He paused. Wardok's network is significantly disrupted. 3 to 5 months before they reconstitute, she nodded. Voss looked at the brace. The shoulder. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. You knew when it happened, he said. Yes, sir. And you kept shooting. Yes, sir. He held her gaze for a moment. I've been commanding operators for 16 years, he said. I have seen people perform under difficult conditions. I have seen people perform well under difficult conditions. He stopped there, which was more than he usually said, and which meant what it meant. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. Set it on the table beside the coin. Official redesignation, he said. Combat medical officer and designated marksman, both positions simultaneously. You are the first person in the history of this command to hold both simultaneously. She looked at the paper. The designated marksman part, she said. With the shoulder, you hold the title based on what you demonstrated, not what you can demonstrate tomorrow. He was precise about this. What comes next is what comes next. Right now, this is what you are. He held out his hand. She shook it. He left. She sat alone with a challenge coin and a redesignation order and a left shoulder that had paid the price for the thing it had been asked to do. And she thought about her father in a barn in Montana on a Tuesday in October, handing her the Barrett and saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. The lesson was not the shooting. The lesson was the decision to shoot made correctly at the right moment for the right reason, with the full understanding of what it would cost. She had paid it. The formal assembly happened the following morning at 800. Nora had expected something small, a brief acknowledgement in the operations center, the kind of quiet, professional recognition this team tended to prefer. What she had not expected was to step outside into the staging area and find every person at FOB Bravo standing in formation. 200 personnel, in the pale morning heat before the day committed to its full brutality, lined up in the patient-specific way that people line up when they are there because they want to be. Voss was at the front, Aldrich stood to the side, Flynn was in the second row, Rourke was in the front rank. He was looking straight ahead in the manner of a man who had decided where to look and would not be moved from it. Voss spoke to the assembly, his voice carried in the dry air. He did not make a long speech. He said what had happened, factually and completely. The first ambush and the 4 casualties in the 11 minutes. The Wardak shot and what the loss of Wardak's leadership had meant for 43 Marines on a road 2 days later. The cash mission and the downed helicopter and the 13 targets in 90 seconds, and the shoulder that had been damaged doing it. He said it the way he would have said any operational report, without ornamentation, without inflation. Then he stopped speaking. The assembly was quiet. Nora stood at the front and felt the weight of 200 people who had decided to stand in the heat at 0800 because they wanted to. And she thought about her father in Kannar province doing the work that nobody was watching, and she understood that the watching was not the point and had never been the point, and he had known that and tried to teach her that, and she was only now understanding what he had meant. Voss turned to her. He saluted, formal, precise. The salute of a commanding officer to someone who has done something that commands a commanding officer's respect. She returned it with her right hand because her left was in its brace and because her right hand was what she had available, and it was enough. The formation came to attention simultaneously, the way formations do when the movement is genuine and not choreographed. 200 people. She looked at them, at Flynn in the second row, who gave one small nod, at Tanner near the back in his sling, who held her gaze steadily, at Aldrich at the side, who was looking at the mountains behind the FOB with the expression of a man thinking about someone who was not present, at Rourke in the front rank. He was looking straight ahead. But as the salute held, he turned his head 4 degrees and looked at her directly, and on his face was the expression of a man who had been in this work for 15 years and had decided after careful consideration that what he was looking at was the best of it. Then he looked front again. No speech beyond the salute. No language that might make it less than it was. The salute came down. The assembly began to disperse. Flynn came forward as the formation broke. She was carrying something in her right hand, a patch fabric roughly circular. She held it out. Nora took it. A red medical cross centered, and behind it black crosshairs extending to the edges. The 2 images overlapping at the center in the way that 2 things overlap when they are not actually 2 things. At the bottom in small clean letters, heal when you can, fight when you must. Both symbols, same space, neither one subordinate to the other. Flynn looked at her. You've been doing both since the first night, Flynn said. This just makes it visible. She said nothing else. Nora held the patch. She thought about her father writing the inscription on the back of a photograph in a barn in Montana, standing at a workbench with a pen in his hand, trying to compress into a few words what he had spent 5 years trying to teach. The way people do when they know they will not have 5 more years and something has to fit into a sentence. Heal when you can. Fight when you must. She pressed the patch once against her palm the way she had pressed the coin. Then she walked back toward the medical tent because there was inventory to check and there was always work to do, and the work was the point. 6 months later, the Naval Special Warfare Center at Coronado occupied a flat peninsula on the western edge of San Diego County where the Pacific came in off the open ocean and hit the beach at an angle that changed with the season. In August, it was direct and indifferent, In February, it came in sideways cold from the crossing. The SEAL training facility sat behind the beach, low buildings, training ranges, and the particular organized purposefulness of a place that existed to prepare people for work that mattered. The classroom had windows on the west side that looked out toward the water. Nora stood at the front of it on a Tuesday morning in February, 6 months and 11 days after the cash mission in Helmand province. Her left shoulder had recovered to approximately 70% of its pre-injury function, which her physical therapist described as exceptional progress and which Nora described as sufficient for the work. The whiteboard behind her read Integrated Combat Medicine. Below it, smaller HM1 Hartley. 24 students sat in rows in front of her. Navy corpsmen, Army and medics, 2 Air Force pararescuemen who had arrived the day before with the particular bearing of people from a different branch adjusting to a different culture. Young faces, most of them in their mid-20s. They had the look of people who had been told this course was difficult and were waiting to find out what difficult meant. She looked at them for a moment. "Good morning," she said. "I am Petty Officer, First Class Nora Hartley. This is Integrated Combat Medicine. 8 weeks. The goal at the end of 8 weeks is not that you know how to shoot and know how to perform trauma care. People walk in here on day 1 knowing both of those things. The goal is that you can do both simultaneously, transitioning between them without preparation time under conditions where the situation is changing faster than your planning can keep up with it." She moved to the table at the front of the room. On the table was a Barrett M82A1 on the left side and a medical ruck on the right side. Between them, positioned precisely at center, was a tourniquet. "Most of you have been taught to think of these as separate disciplines," she said. "You have a medical role and you have a combat role, and there is a line between them, and you work on one side of the line or the other. I'm going to ask you to stop thinking that way. Not because the distinction is wrong, because the situation does not honor it." She picked up the tourniquet with her right hand. The rifle and the tourniquet are the same tool. She set it down. Different application, same fundamental requirement. You must override the part of your brain that wants to run. You must execute a precise physical action under conditions that are working against precision. You must prioritize correctly and quickly and without the benefit of rehearsed answers, because the situation you are in will not match the situation you rehearsed for. She walked to the door of the classroom and opened it. Outside, the training area was set up with a medical dummy and a target at 600 meters downrange. "Scenario," she said. "Your teammate has a femoral artery injury, 90 seconds until he is in irreversible hemorrhagic shock. There is a shooter at 600 meters engaging your position. You cannot call for support. There is no one else." She looked at the class. "You cannot do both. That is what you have been told." "The training says choose." She paused. "I am telling you the training is wrong." She moved to the dummy, dropped to one knee, tourniquet from the side pouch of the ruck, high on the thigh, one-handed in under 25 seconds. She stood, moved to the Barrett, settled into position, found the target, right shoulder because the left was what it was, and you worked with what you had. Pressed the trigger. Downrange the target registered to hit at center mass. She stood and moved back to the dummy and completed the wound packing in 22 seconds. Total elapsed time from first contact to stable casualty and neutralized threat, 58 seconds. She turned back to the class. Nobody spoke for a moment. A student in the second row raised his hand. 23 Army with the kind of face that still registered genuine surprise when it encountered something it had not anticipated. "How long did it take you to be able to do that at that speed?" She considered the question. "My father started training me at 12 years old," she said. "He spent 5 years on it." She paused. "But you do not have 5 years, and you do not need 5 years. You need 8 weeks and the willingness to fail repeatedly until the failure teaches you something. That is the entire methodology." "Your father," another student said. "Was he military?" She reached into her breast pocket and produced a photograph, worn at the edges, creased from too many foldings. She held it up so the front row could see it. "Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Hartley," she said, "United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper. 2 tours, and he believed that every skill you carry is the same skill in different clothes. That the common requirement is the capacity to act precisely when everything around you is imprecise." She put the photograph back. "He taught me both of these things," she said. "For a long time, I tried to use only one of them." She looked at the class steadily. "I was wrong to do that, and I was wrong in a way that had costs that were not only mine. That is the other thing this course is going to teach you, the cost of not using what you have when the situation requires it." The class was quiet in the particular way that people are quiet when they are listening at a level below ordinary attention. She went back to the table at the front of the room. Today we start with the fundamentals, she said. Not shooting, not medicine, the breathing. 4 counts in 7 held 8 out. This is the common foundation for everything we do in this course. You need to be able to run it at full exertion under fire while making a decision that affects someone's life. We will drill it until it is automatic. She looked at them. Your hands know what to do, she said. 8 weeks from now, we are going to get your brain out of the way. She began. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in the 4th week of the course when the students were on the range working transition drills, and Flynn, who had been assigned as her assistant instructor for the semester, was running the timing. Her phone showed Voss. She stepped away from the line. Doc Voss said, high-risk personnel recovery. Forward element Eastern Afghanistan separated from their unit. Multiple casualties expected. Enemy sniper threat in the area elevated terrain complex geometry. He paused. We need medical and precision fire capability. Both. She looked at her left shoulder, looked at the range where 24 students were running transitions that 6 weeks ago they had not believed were possible. What's the timeline? Wheels up in 90 minutes from North Island. 60 minutes, sir. You sure about the shoulder? She thought about 1,240 meters in the dark in Helmand province, with a shoulder full of shrapnel and 43 Marines on a road the following morning. Sufficient for the work, she said. That's what I needed to hear. Voss paused one more time. And Nora, Raymond would have said the same. She stood still for a moment after the call ended. The Pacific was visible over the berm at the far end of the range, blue and carrying the particular weight of distance. The students were running their transitions under Flynn's instruction, the rhythm of it, steady, the timing getting shorter with each iteration. She watched them for a moment, then she went to find Flynn. Flynn was at the timing station with a stopwatch and her notebook calling corrections with the economy of language that was entirely Flynn. She looked up when Nora approached. Voss, Nora said. Flynn looked at her. How long? 60 minutes. Flynn looked at the class, looked back at Nora. I've got them, Flynn said. That was all. Nora walked to the equipment room behind the training building. The gear wall was organized the way she had organized every gear wall she had ever been given responsibility for, with the precision of someone who understood that in the moment when you needed something, you needed it to be exactly where you expected it to be. Left side medical ruck. 42 pounds packed to the standard she had developed in a supply tent at FOB Bravo on the night before the first mission that took her outside the wire. Every pocket in sequence. Every item positioned for the hand that would reach for it in the dark. Right side rifle case. The Barrett was there and it was clean and zeroed, and she had maintained it with the same consistency she maintained the medical kit because her father had believed that the tools you carried were an expression of the commitment you had made to the people who depended on you. In the center of the wall between the two sides, she had placed 2 things. The patch that Flynn had given her. Red medical cross, black crosshairs, both centered, neither subordinate, heal when you can. Fight when you must, and her father's photograph, the inscription on the back worn soft from handling. She did not need to read it. She had known it by heart since she was 12. She looked at it for a moment. I understand it now, Dad, she said. She had said that before. She would say it again probably as the understanding grew into territory she could not see from here. That was the nature of what he had given her. Not a lesson with a fixed meaning, but a framework with room to grow into. She pulled the medical ruck off the wall with her right hand. The weight was familiar. She pulled the rifle case off with her left arm because the shoulder was what it was, and you worked with what you had, and that was always enough when you had prepared correctly. She walked out of the equipment room. The tarmac at North Island Naval Air Station was 10 minutes from the training center. The late afternoon sun was cutting across the Pacific at the angle it cut in February orange and precise, throwing long shadows from the buildings across the asphalt. The helicopter was already there when she arrived. Of Black Hawk rotors beginning their cycle, the crew chief doing his pre-flight checks with the automatic competence of someone who had done this several thousand times. Voss was at the bird with 2 operators she recognized from Bravo and 1 she didn't. Rourke was there. She stopped for a moment. He looked the same as he had always looked, a man assembled for a specific purpose and being used for it. M4 on its single-point sling pack staged by the bird, the expression he wore when there was work to do. He looked at her shoulder the way he had looked at it 6 months ago in a recovery room with his hand on hers, applying pressure. She reached into her breast pocket and held up the coin. He nodded once. She put the coin back. He turned and staged his pack on the bird. The crew chief gave them 2 minutes. She stood on the tarmac for a moment with the medical ruck in her right hand and the rifle case in her left and the Pacific behind her carrying the full weight of its distance and the sun going down the way it always went down on the western coast, indifferent to schedules and specific about its beauty. She thought about her father watching from whatever vantage point the dead have access to, if any, and she thought about what he would have said. He would not have said anything. He would have given her that look, the one from the firing line on the Tuesday in October when she hit the 1,200-meter target for the first time. The one that didn't need words because the target was downrange and the evidence was in the hole and nothing else needed to be stated. She thought about Ruth and Billings, who had said go and meant it and would say it again. She thought about Flynn running transition drills on the range with 24 students who tomorrow would be better than they were today and who 6 weeks from now would carry something forward that Nora had carried from a barn in Montana through a supply tent in Helmand to a classroom facing the Pacific. She thought about Tanner's shoulder, which had healed. She thought about her own, which had not and which did not need to. Then she stopped thinking and picked up her gear and walked to the helicopter. She climbed in. Rourke was already in his seat. The medical ruck went between her feet. The rifle case went across her knees. The crew chief pulled the door. The rotors accelerated. The tarmac fell away beneath them, and then the base, and then the coastline of the peninsula, and then they were over the water, the Pacific opening beneath them in every direction, flat and enormous, and carrying everything and revealing nothing. She looked down at the rifle case across her knees, looked at the medical ruck between her feet. Raymond Hartley had spent 5 years teaching his daughter that the rifle and the tourniquet were the same tool. It took her 3 years, 2 promises, and 1 August morning in Helmand Province to understand what he meant. She never forgot again. The helicopter banked east over the water. The sun was behind them now. Ahead, the terrain was dark and specific and full of people who needed what she was carrying. She pressed her left hand flat against the rifle case, the shoulder above it, doing what it could do, which was enough. Both hands. Always both hands. She looked straight ahead.